We are going to build a multi-radius fingerboard jig for guitar, bass, and whatever other kind of string instrument you can think of. All you have to do is change the measurements if it's too big or too small. So I'm going to start with the bass and build the outer frame. Let's see what I got up here that'll work. So this is a COVID-19 build, so that means the prices have tripled, and that means I'm using scrap that I would not normally use. This is going to be the base or the floor plate, and I'm using a small enough piece of it that I'm hoping it won't show the warp that the rest of it has. So I'm going to focus on the largest pieces first, so that I know I have the good amount of wood here. So I had to go get a piece of MDF because I didn't have any solid wood that was the size I need that wasn't warped. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, what I've done so far is I've got the router base and the main frame floor. As I stated before, I've got the router base and I've got the floor base, and I'm going to skip around until I've got the largest pieces done, and then I will go in an order that I can talk to you about. So the router base is going to be 29 9/16 long, 7 inches wide, 3/4 inches thick. And it's the same for the outer frame floor or base. So it's the same exact measurement, and the floor base, that can be plywood if you want, because you know, you're really not going to need to dig into it other than putting the screws into the frame, making it part of the frame. That's all you're going to have to do. So that can be plywood. So those two pieces that I thought were good enough, I started looking at them with a square and on a flat surface, and they're wobbling all over, so I had to recut. I used plywood. These two here. This is going to be, number one will be my floor base for the outer frame, 29 9/16 by 7 inches by 3/4 thick. The difficulty of pushing through the wood had nothing to do with the wood. It was how my dust collection system is set up. It's pushing against the saw too hard. The third piece I'm going to focus on is the inner frame top piece. Now, I converted all of this stuff from metric to European or American, whatever you want to call it. So the measurement for this top piece on the inner frame is supposed to be 7/16, and my local hardware store didn't have any MDF that was 7/16, which is weird because I thought they did. Anyway, so this is 1/2 inch. I honestly don't think it's going to make a difference. I could plane it down, but I'm not going to. So the inner frame top piece, 23 5/8 long by 3 3/4 inches wide. And again, I said 7/16 thick, but this is 1/2 inch. So I'll run it lengthways through my table saw, and then I'll cut the smaller piece on that one. T-square is the way to go on this longer stuff. As long as you hold it tight. If you don't have a large table for the table saw, I suggest getting one of these roller helpers, roller stands. They do help quite a bit. Alright, so the fourth piece I'm going to cut is for the inner frame bottom piece, and that's going to be 3/4 inch plywood. Same measurement as the top piece, 23 5/8 by 3 3/4. But again, 3/4 inch thick. Now keep in mind I'm numbering and labeling everything. So my number 1 board was the router base. My number 2 board was the floor base or the bottom. So these are the outer frame. These 2 pieces are the horizontal pieces for the inner frame top, inner frame bottom. Alright, so I'm going to go back to the outer frame and finish that up now that I've got those really large pieces done. So part number 5 is going to be for the router base or router board top. I'm going to need 2 pieces at 29 9/16 long, 1 11/16 wide, and 3/4 inch thick. Now those measurements are going to change depending on the size of your router. I happen to have a pretty large router, so it's going to take a pretty big gap. You'll see later when I'm done. So what I'm calling the router board top, they're only guides. So I'm going to use these 2 pieces that were warped because they're going to sit on top of this piece, and the router itself is going to sit inside that. So I'm not going to have to worry about if these pieces up here are going to be level or flat. So like I said, I'm just going to use these warped pieces. The fingerboard build, or machine build, has been on hold for 5 months because you can see the grooves there in my thumb. I almost cut my thumb off, and I'm picking the skin off the blade and making sure that it's still straight. I cut the tip of the bone off, and yeah, gross. Anyway, so $25 for this entire 5-piece set could have saved my hand. So what I did with all the 5 months off is I spent $25. Let's not do that again, shall we? If you ever do something like that, make sure you either replace the blade or make sure it's still straight. And let's get going on the project. So for these vertical pieces, this is a 1x4. If you use a bandsaw, you can get away with just using 2 pieces at 33 5/8, cut it down the middle. If you use a table saw, you're probably going to have to cut 4 pieces because of the width of the blade. If you do use the table saw, you might be able to use the other half as blocks. We'll see. I think I'm finally figuring out that my motor is not square with the framework, or the guard is not square or something, because there's a 1/16 of an inch difference between this end and that end. And that happens on a lot of my stuff. So a lot of my stuff doesn't end up perfectly square. I got the vertical frame bars for the outer frame done. Those were 33 5/8 by 1 3/4. Now the leftover boards, the 4 leftover boards here, are 1 5/8, and I need, for the inner frame, I need vertical frame bars, 4 pieces at 29 3/4 by just under 1 1/16. I mean 1 11/16, which 1 5/8 is close enough in this situation. So all I have to do is cut these down to length. So I have 4 leftovers from cutting those pieces down to 29 3/4, and I have 3 3/4 by 1 5/8 by 3/4 left over. So I'm going to use those blocks in the inner frame. It needs 3 3/4 by 1 3/4 by 3/4, I mean. But I'm going to use these 1 5/8. I don't think there should be a problem. I'm just trying to use whatever I cut, you know. So I'm going to call those 7A through D. So I'm skipping around trying to use up all of the small pieces. So now I'm up to a long piece again, and I'm on the inner frame. So I'm going to start the inner frame top horizontal support. I'm going to cut it long and trim it off. So it's going to be 21 inches by 1 3/4 by 1 3/4. Scratch that. It's going to be 21 inches by 1 3/4 by 3/4, one piece. Alright, so that piece that I cut for 21 inches, I'm going to use the leftovers for blocks on the frame angle adjusters. And just all of this little random stuff I'm going to use for blocks if they're large enough. While I was off with my thumb healing, I was able to save up enough money to buy a smaller router. You can see the size difference is just enormous. So this is why I decided to wait to measure the top piece for the framework on the router guide. So the new router is 3 3/4 inches wide, and the board base, the router board base, is 7 inches. So 7 inches minus 3 3/4 should be 3 1/4. So I'm going to divide 3 1/4 into 2 pieces and put one on each side. So I should have a board that's on each side that's 1 5/8, and might have to go, you know, just a little bit larger than, or thinner than that, just so it doesn't get stuck. As far as the router base board goes, I'm going to put a center line all the way down it, because I'm going to have to cut a hole 1 inch wide for the bit. Alright, got a couple of those pieces done. And again, it doesn't matter if these are warped. this way because they're not actually holding anything, they're guiding from the side. So let's see, here we are. I'm just lining up the edge on this one here to the outside of the board. I'm going to put a center mark on this new router, just pencil or chalk or something. Yeah, it moved because I twisted the router. It's not because of the measurements. Alright, looking good. Now I'm just gonna put a piece here, a piece on each end, and before I attach them to the main base, I will clip that hole. So 2 sheets of 3/4 inch hardwood, or I should say 1 piece of hardwood and 1 piece of plywood. Anyway, 3/4 inches each, 1.5 inches. So I'm going to use 1.25 inch screws. I should use wood screws, but you know, drywall screws are fine. Everybody does it. I'm also using 2 drills because once you get going, it's a real pain to have to change a bit and change a drill bit and change the drive bit, blah blah blah. So if you have 2, good for you. I hate it when people do that. It drives me nuts, but yeah, I just did it. So I'm going to turn down my setting. Alright, I got this one started. I'm going to get this one so it doesn't move. Nice. All right. Now the reason I left the camera on this whole time, this is why I use screws. If it doesn't work out, I can move out, I can move them, I can take the screws out, move the holes, you know. It worked, we're good. Now, as I said, I'm going to take this apart when I get done building it. So, since these holes were freehand, I'm going to mark this one and then put a number here. Right now this one's called 10A. So I'm going to put 10A down here. I'm going to put a line here or something to make sure that each end is correct as well. And then the same with that side. That'll be 10B. You know, this would be a good spot for some scrap. If you don't want to create more junk, you know, if you don't have anything that's going to fit with this easily so far, you could just use a smaller piece and put it where you need to stop. And you know, it would easily block it as long as you can put 2 screws in it. So that's up to you. So router direction is important here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it this way down, so there's going to be a hole here. I'm going to run it this direction, and the blade will be spinning clockwise, tearing off as I go. If you run it the other way, there should be a lot of chip out. So you always want to run this direction, shut it off, adjust the machine, start it up, run it this direction, etc. So as it sits right now, that inch wide hole is going to be roughly 22 inches long, and most fretboards are no longer than, say, 18 and a quarter, 18 and a half, 19 and a half, depending on the model. So there's plenty of room here. You can probably do some bass. I used I just lost the name of the bit, but I drilled this out. So I'm going to connect each end of the hole on each side. Then I'm going to drill, saw out the excess. If you have one of these workmate or whatever you want to call them tables, I suggest using this, and make sure you don't hit any of the framework with your blade, so you may need to move the board. So here's this piece. All I have to do now is put the pieces back on it. At this point I could use a little bead of glue on each one if I wanted to. Alright, at this point what you want to do is just put the screw through enough to where you can barely feel it, or that you can see that it's just barely sticking out of the surface. Now, you should be able to put the board back in place, and it should fall right back together with the tips of the screws going in. Might want to side shift a bit, just a bit, in case one of the screws isn't in place. I put the drill on almost the lowest setting. This is a Craftsman 19.2 and I have it on setting number 4. That way the clutch will do what you hear it do and won't strip out the wood. So even though this is hardwood and I pre-drilled it, you can't always win. So I can either put more screws in this, glue it together, or just use a different piece. So again, run the router over the piece once it's completed and see if there's any spots that catch. I found one spot right here. It was a little rough and it made it tilt, so I can either sand it down or file it down. Doesn't matter as long as it won't catch after that. I'm kind of sick of cutting parts for the moment, so I'm gonna put the main base together. So I'm gonna take these blocks that I made. For me they were numbered number 8, A through D. I'm going to put a center line through them vertically, and then I'm going to put a center line on the floor base. I'm going to mount the block on that center line. So I'm using a couple of clamps. This is the best it's going to get for me as far as having the right tools. So I'm going to drill here, make sure it's lined up with the edge of the board there, and put a couple of screws in lightly. These I actually might, I'm considering going to a longer nail or a screw. On second thought, I'm going to stick with the 1 1/4 because I don't want these to interfere with the horizontal nails, screws. I don't want this wood to split. On the other hand, I don't want anything get caught on these screws once it's flipped over either. So I might drive them in a little further when things proceed.